Is Craig. Craig, welcome.
Hello. Thanks again, Paul.
Yeah, we're here with the firm Barth Calderon. Craig is a paralegal at the firm, and we want to jump in to a very important topic, which is limited liability company, but single member versus multi-member. What is it all about? Okay, here we are. So, Craig, let's jump into this. We know limited liability companies are used for property, business, but let's talk about the difference between a single member, multi member, anything else you want to highlight here.
Well, it's good to start with this understanding. I think that most people, many people, have probably heard of a limited liability company. I mean, heck, they're advertised on the radio here in Southern California, and I'm sure across the country. And what the heck is a limited liability company to begin with? Well, the general idea of that limited liability company is exactly what's in the name: to limit someone's liability for owning an asset, a piece of real estate, or owning a business that might be inside that limited liability company, to hopefully shield the owner, perhaps the company founder or the owner of the real estate, from liability that might arise out of that asset. So
Yeah, and the key
generally,
is,
that's the starting point.
yeah, and the key is we always talk about at the firm. I hear you and the attorneys talk about the unforeseen liabilities. It's you know, uh, people never see these things coming, and if they hit, then that's when people are caught off guard. So it's stuff that can happen down the road.
It is. It's the crazy things like owning a rental property and having someone from the United States Postal Service slip and fall on the porch and
Right.
receive legal notice from the United States Postal Service for an incident that you didn't know about.
Right.
Right? That's
Yeah.
that kind of big risk that's scary out there. And that's where people think of limited liability companies. I've got to protect myself. And so they go off and get a limited liability company. And oftentimes those are done very generic as single member limited liability companies.
And let me say something here because as you know, as we do these workshops and you and others at the firm with you know, owning a business, owning rental property, great, obviously great assets to have. Rental property is a great asset, but they come with a liability footprint. And uh, the idea is to have the proper legal structure for these entities because owning them in your personal name or even in the name of your living trust, which is not an asset protection vehicle, I've heard you talk about many times,
Right.
is you're just exposing yourself to unlimited liability. And one of the recent workshops we did was we had one of our landlord attorneys was on there with you and one of our other asset protection attorneys, and our landlord attorney was talking about the growth of mold claims, for example, and dealing with a mold claim where it was a 20-year tenant who complained about mold. There was mold, but it was cleaned up. The health department said okay, and then there was a multi-million-dollar lawsuit for respiratory issues. There was a child there, lost wages from work, and the owner fought it. No asset protection, fought it, thinking this is ridiculous, and the insurance company chimed in, said, we don't want to touch this liability because of the way the mold developed. We're going to step away, right? So insurance companies are going to fight
Right.
it. And this guy lost, and it was a $3 million judgment against the landlord, and it was having to pay attorney's fees and the liability claim for the tenant. And this guy was going to lose the building. So these are the issues you never want to be caught up in, and why we're talking about limited liability companies.
Absolutely. And what most folks don't understand is that the generic single member limited liability company is just that. It's very generic, and folks need to understand the risk they face, that even though a piece of real estate or a business may be inside a single member LLC, we have to remember that that single member is the owner of that piece of real estate. And if that person has a liability arise outside of that business or outside of that piece of real estate, that liability, may it be a car accident, it could be one of their children having an incident that draws a lawsuit to the family. Well, now the lawsuit that's outside of that business, outside of that LLC, could potentially cause a judgment that would award a plaintiff, for example, that LLC to satisfy the judgment. And we don't want that to happen. We don't want that LLC to become a tasty asset for some lawyer to go after.
So the single then is one person. The multi-member, describe that scenario. Like, who can be the multi-member? Is it a 50-50 thing? I've heard of people giving 1% to their kids, which is perfectly fine to make it a multi-member. Tell me a little bit about that.
Exactly right, Paul, that a multi-member is just that. There's really no limit to the number of members that you could include in a limited liability company arrangement. The key, however, is which state you actually form that limited liability company in. Some states are not as friendly with the protection that they afford to limited liability companies in general. So there are certain states that we use in our firm more often because those states are very friendly with the protection they provide. So a multi-member LLC is just that. It's one in which you have more than just, let's say, the owner who originally bought a piece of real estate or originally started the business. We bring in, maybe like you said, one of the children or all of the children or a spouse or a business partner. The idea is to have more than one member of the LLC and establish that LLC in the right state where that state provides significant protection for multiple member arrangements. That is the key right there, that multiple members in another state may not provide the same protection.
So I got it. So just because your property is in California, for example, doesn't mean you need to have a California LLC. You could have a Nevada LLC registered to do business in California. Perfectly normal. I know our firm does that all the time. And your comment is that certain states have more robust asset protection provisions for multi-member LLCs versus single member. Is that an accurate statement?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If we look at really some of the fundamental reasons we do asset protection is we really want to promote a smooth settlement, for example, or we want to prevent a lawsuit in general. We'd really like to make it less easy to go after an asset, for example, a rental property or a business asset. And by setting up the structures correctly, our attorneys make it very unappetizing, not so tasty, to go after those multi-member limited liability company assets, and really promotes negotiation and maybe settlement, but we hope to limit all those things by setting up the right structures.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the LLCs, it's kind of like earthquake insurance on your house, where if you have lousy earthquake insurance or you didn't pay your premiums or whatever the case is, if the earthquake never happens, who cares about your lousy insurance? You didn't need to use it. It's when the earthquake is there and your house is rumbling where you go, I hope I have good protection.
Right.
Asset protection is the same way. If nothing ever happens, knock on wood, okay, then throw caution to the wind. Don't have anything. It's when something happens is when people get caught up in the process and emotional and financial pain steps in. Fair statement?
I totally agree, Paul. It's as long as you possess the risk protection crystal ball and you know that you're completely okay. And if you own a rental property, for example, no one ever comes to your rental property.
Right.
As long as you've got all that taken care of and nobody ever comes to your business, nobody ever comes to your rental property, you never drive a car, right? I'm kidding, of course. We never know. We have protection in place for the big what if, right? The big what if.
And it's a great comment. And now let's make a distinction between inside and outside liability, because you brought it up. car accident, but um, where what we talk about a lot is everybody thinks about inside liability. Let's say you own a property, that
Right.
would be, tenant liability, guy falls off your roof, construction worker, you know, tenant has a party, people drink, get drunk, mold
Right.
cleanse, blah, 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 all that stuff. People think about that. What they don't think about is the outside liability. Well, you have a liability away from your business or property, and creditors are looking at, you know, a business, and it doesn't have to be Disney. The fact that you own stock in your S corporation, creditors love stock. They'll grab it in a second, or your
Yeah.
rental property. They'll go after that as an asset. So that's an outside liability. And I know you talk about the LLC as a protective wrapper around that.
There was a great illustration actually done by one of our attorneys, Brad Barth, phenomenal attorney, asset protection attorney, loved our team, but he used an example that stuck with me years and years ago. And it's this idea of establishing a limited liability company, a wrapper. This is just your LLC, and you've got your business asset, and you put your business asset inside that limited liability company. You put your real estate assets inside the limited liability company. If something happens inside, it would be difficult for that risk to come out and get your personal assets. The challenge is if your child, for example, driving the car as a new driver, accidentally runs into a child in the crosswalk at school, now a lawsuit comes to your family from outside the LLC. And if you don't have the right structure, the right LLC structure, the right multi-member protection, it may be possible for that judgment to reach in and take those assets. And that's what we're looking to avoid, is making sure that you're protected from both the inside risk and potential outside risk. Does that make sense, Paul?
It does. It's a great reminder, Craig, and great information out there. I want to tell people now at this point that um, you're looking at the screen. If anybody watching this, because we put out a lot of these live events, or we're constantly trying to help teach, educate, give refreshers on really hot issues. This is very hot asset protection for rental property business. There's 40 million lawsuits filed. There's new stuff, new liabilities coming out every time. So just important to be protected. And if you look at the screen, if you text guard assets to that number, take a snapshot of that, write that down, because that gets you one-on-one with Craig and the team for a complimentary asset protection assessment. We're happy to take a look at what you got and give you our observations, recommendations on how to make sure you're pulled together, organized, and protected. And you don't got to be a multimillionaire, gazillionaire for this. Asset protection is about understanding what it is, how to get protected, and just making the right decisions for you and your family, whether you own rental property, a business, or have big positions in stocks, bonds, and cash. So text guard assets. You can find a time on the calendar with that process there. Pick a time that works for you. Get one-on-one with the team. We'd love to give you feedback and start that conversation. Craig, as always, great reminders. And stay tuned to us, because every Thursday, 9 a.m. California time, we're going live right here on LinkedIn. Find us, and really glad that you made it this time. Craig, thank you.
You're welcome, Paul.